welcome to the Paragon of Play podcast. I'm your host, Jessica Spice. Today we have Katie Creighton on. We'll be talking about play-based learning in the French Immersion Classroom. Katie is both an Ontario certified teacher and a registered early childhood educator, a rare breed. She is currently teaching full-day kindergarten, and this is her third year of teaching French Immersion full-day kindergarten. Hello, Katie. Thank you for coming on.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you. So today, Katie, we're talking about play-based learning in French immersion. Can you tell us a little bit about the role of play-based learning in the French immersion classroom?
Yes, absolutely. So my background is in early childhood studies, so I'm all for play-based learning in all grades. But I think especially in the early years, there's just so much rich social emotional development, cognitive, physical, fine motor. But in early French immersion, we really need the oral vocabulary, which is so perfect to back up every other area, and it's awesome to get that through play. We know that kids learn better when they're playing, and they often feel that their play is purposeful, and it's something that they're actually interested in. So first, I always really want kids to have fun and genuinely enjoy learning, in the sense that I'm getting JKs or year one students who this is their first experience to school. They should be having fun. They should have a positive experience with it, but then also a positive experience with the language learning. I want it to be not this lady that speaks French to me and I have no idea what they're saying and she wants me to do all these hard things and I don't like it here. It should be fun, it should be inviting, and they should be interested in what they're going to be doing. So in terms of what that looks like for oral vocabulary, I'm thinking a lot of our play components, we just get a lot of oral vocab in that I'm speaking French with them and offering them, scaffolding it. I'm never, day one, hello, welcome, I'm going to speak full French at you and expect you to do this. Piecing, sandwiching words in there and really making it fun for them and finding out what their interests are. So I'm thinking what play-based learning is to me is embodying that into each of our kindergarten centers. So in a drama center, for example, it might be a bakery. And let's learn the food names in French. Oh, now that we know our food names, can we start to practice how do you order something? How do you say, here is your donut or your bagel or whatever it is that they want to pretend? And kids are genuinely really want to impress their educators. They want to say, oh, I'm going to learn that word or I'm going to practice that word. And often so many kids think it's so cool if they can start to speak French that they'll start calling things other things. They'll use little French accents on words that they know and really want to show their parents that, which is really fantastic, seeing that, like them building it up. But it's because it's something they're interested in. So that's where the role, I would say, ultimately is in the play-based learning, that it's not, hey, sit over here and we're all going to repeat how to say these things in French. It's, oh, you're in the drama center. This is something that's interesting to you. I'm going to play with you. I'm going to give you the donut, or I'm going to pretend to eat it here and tell you what the words are. Oh, but you're interested in the sand table and you want to play with the cars and the trucks. Well, I'm going to give you the words from that. I'm not going to have everyone sitting at the carpet holding up a flashcard, because if the word isn't exciting for you and it isn't meaningful to you, repeating it isn't going to make you learn it. You're going to learn it when you're having fun and you have a reason to use the vocab. So I would really hope that play-based learning is something that's happening in all French immersion kindergarten classrooms. I know if in future you're listening to this podcast, it might not be a pandemic, but right now that looks a little bit different. So hopefully we can get back to that soon, but I know a lot of educators are doing really amazing things for play, even in online or in person when that happens.
Yeah.
So like in virtual for right now, like we did like ice cream play yesterday. And so kids brought snow or Play-Doh or something, pretend that was ice cream, and ran little ice cream shops. So it was similar to like the idea of how do you order? What do you want? What does your ice cream need? Oh, you want sprinkles on yours? You want chocolate sauce? How do we say those in French? How do we say to make something? And getting that vocab in, and kids just light up when they realize like they've said a word that's exciting for them and describes what they're doing. Not, oh, I know how to say this, but I'm never going to do that. I'm not interested in cars. So the word for car isn't helpful for me.
I love that. In the play-based classroom, we leverage play as a tool to bring forward that learning in an authentic and natural way for the students. And I love that you brought that to how French can be taught in the kindergarten classroom. You're leveraging play. It's just the normal interactions that occur during play and during open exploration of materials, where you can bring in that new vocabulary slowly and in a way that's actually relevant to the child.
Exactly. And it's so similar. I think a lot of people, like, it seems obvious that we'd use play-based learning in English kindergarten, And it's like,
Mhm.
oh, you're using like, if you're doing sensory play, you're giving them these words of like soft or sticky or hard or fuzzy. And it's going to be the same thing in French, that we're just giving them words to describe what they're doing.
I love that. That's a really authentic way of bringing in that vocabulary. That's awesome. Now, some parents or family members of students might not understand at first how play-based learning would fit in. Do you find that that's a little hard for parents to understand at first? And if so, how do you help parents to understand the role of play in their child's French learning?
So I think parents just, they want to see that their child is learning. And for them, oftentimes that looks like quantitative data, like, okay, I'm going to hold up these flashcards and my kid knows 8 out of 10 of these. I know what their clear next step is, and I know which ones they're missing. I know which ones they've mastered. And that's like an obvious kind of thing, way to, for parents to see what your kid knows and to know that they are in fact learning. Because I think that's something that often gets like, oh, in play-based learning, how do you know? How do you assess that? If every child's doing something different in the same classroom, like how do you assess that? And I'm sure that's a whole other like topic for your podcast, is like assessment in play-based learning, because that is
Oh,
something
yeah,
that is
it's on the
challenging for
list.
educators, but I think we
Yeah.
get lots of really rich documentation out of that. In terms of showing parents what play-based learning looks like, I think it's really important to understand where they're coming from, and knowing that they're not saying, oh, don't do play because they think it's bad. It just, that wasn't their education experience, and they're used to,
Mhm.
okay, you fill out the worksheets and you do these little readers, and that's how you get to a point where you graduate high school and you can get a job. That's what they're looking at their child, even though their child's 3 years old, like that's what they're thinking of when they want to see these worksheets or flashcards or like early reading books. And so often I try and get it, like, give kind of examples of what early readers would even look like. To be like, okay, in our SK program, or like in a year 2 or when students are ready, might not always be SK, it might be earlier or later.
Yep.
But here's what an early reader would look like. Oh, like, let's look, this was the word chapeau. It means hat in French, and there's a little picture of a hat right here. But if your child doesn't know the word for chapeau, they're going to see that and they're going to think hat. And the
Mhm.
letter sounds here are not phonetic in any way. If they're going to go k, h, a, p, and it's like, that's not going to make the word chapeau no matter what they do. So even
Mhm.
if they had the letter sounds, if they don't have the vocab, it's going to be really hard to read. So we really want to get that vocab, and that happens in really authentic ways. It happens through play. It happens through transitions. Like that's something even online right now, I'm noticing that, oh, like you don't necessarily know how to help, like how to ask an adult for help, because that's not something you're often doing in French. Or like we have to really be like, okay, let's go through the articles of clothing that normally we would talk about 4 times a day as you transitioned in and out of the classroom. So thinking of ways to get that authentic vocab, because that's when we go back to the role of play-based learning. If the role of play-based learning is building up vocab, then that's where it's like, okay, even more for parents, like they need this before they can go on to their next steps. They
Mhm.
need to play, because like play is fantastic in an English program as well, but it also like adds an extra benefit, I would say, in the French immersion program, because there's so many things that they can't get to without it. Like, okay, we're going to learn 3D shapes. I want you to explore with these blocks, and we give it the names of the blocks and different shapes in a really low stress environment. So then we start to compare them. Like, you know what these shapes are, and you're not looking at me like I have 5 heads when I say a word that sounds very unfamiliar to you, that you've kind of heard it throughout the year because you've been in the block area so often. That when we get to 3D shapes, it's like, oh yeah, I know, like I know what a carré is, or I know, I'm blanking on what the shapes names is, which is like classic. Yeah, okay. Yeah, but just thinking of like, we want to give them the vocab so that when we get to the next step, they have it. And it's not, oh no, someone's speaking to me in French 30 minutes straight. I can't access my math learning, or I can't access my outdoor learning or gym because I don't know what they're saying. I want to make sure they have enough so that when we get to different places, it's useful.
Mhm.
And then also, I'm fairly honest that like school is exhausting for kids. JK, the year 1, like a lot of kids in September, October, they're falling asleep at lunch. Like that's tiring.
I want to fall asleep at lunch too.
Yeah, it's so much for their little bodies.
Yeah.
And then to have someone else who's speaking French to you, like that's even, I don't know, I would say that's even more tiring. You're
Yes.
constantly trying to figure out, what am I supposed to do? This person said en ligne. okay, I guess some of the older kids are lining up. I guess that's what I'm supposed to do. She's making these hand movements. I guess I'm supposed to follow her. But just like, so incorporating that play to be like, okay, for 10 minutes right now, I'm in the block area. And my teacher and my EC, they're at the sand area in the drama center. I don't have to listen to French right now. I can have a couple seconds where my brain can really relax and I can play with other kids, but I don't have to worry about what else is going on so that kids get a brain break from us a little bit in that sense, so that when we go to talk to them, they're ready. Their brain is ready to soak in new knowledge. If we taught them all day straight, direct teaching, they wouldn't be soaking any of that in. We might get the 5 minutes when they came in the morning, but it wouldn't be useful for their brains.
Mhm.
Versus, okay, you're sitting here listening to me. This isn't helpful. Over here in the sand area, you're working on your fine motor, you're talking with your friends, you're experimenting with something like that's rich learning that wouldn't happen in a direct teaching kind of format. And I think also just like showing parents, we have a few continuums in my board. So like, here's a writing continuum. Your child, where they're at for writing, this is actually developmentally appropriate. So just reassuring with parents, yes, they're playing, but because they're building up fine motor skills and they're building up their language, look, their writing is still on track. They don't need to be sitting doing printing worksheets all day to have the writing where it needs to be. So I'll just like really reassuring parents that yes, we do a lot of play, but they're exactly where they're supposed to be. They're on track. They're going to be ready.
That's great. Play is what they should be doing. That's what we want.
Yes, exactly.
That's great. Have you found that you've been able now at the time of recording this, as you said earlier, we're in a pandemic, so you and I are both teaching virtual. Have you found you're able to bring play into your virtual classroom at all?
Yeah, so it looks a little bit different, but we often do like building challenges or art challenges
Oh,
integrated with our like our literacy and math. And then as well, we have in the afternoon, like it's just an open play block, which is
mhm,
what I would love to kind of do more of all day, but it's also trying to make sure we get these times for parents to be like, this is when your literacy time is, and you're here for 20 minutes. You're not sitting down for a long time or doing anything hard. It's just like, okay, this is a very focused task, which would be like similar to our small groups in person anyway. And then it just to make sure the timing works out, just to
mhm,
support that learning to be like, okay, this is when our small groups are. And then the afternoon, we do a lot more open play.
mhm.
So yeah, it's like really like blown my mind in terms of the things we can do. Like in the beginning, we were much, okay, like let's do building challenges, let's do art. And now we're like, hey, bring a bucket of water, which is like one of those things you're like, a bucket of water, a 4-year-old and computer, like should that miss? But they are so good. They'll leave like just leave mics off and they're like amazing at that. Like they're not all shouting or anything. But we can be like, okay, like everyone today we did bucket of water and your toys and we
Oh,
washed our toys, which they like thought was the most amazing thing in the world. But it's like, okay, you have all these like hard animals or dice or different things that we use often. Let's play with like you play with them often, but let's put them in water. And it's like, how does that feel? Oh, your thing is slippery now. Oh, you've noticed the bucket of water has turned brown. I guess you've never watched your dinosaurs before. This is fantastic. And just like that sensory learning, we get vocab in there and they're having fun. Like that's so amazing that it's just often really simple things, especially when they're at home, that we're not trying to say, okay, bring your magnetizers or these things that we might have in the
mhm,
classroom. It's very simple. Bring a bucket of water and something to wash. There's kids that might have utensils, like everyone has something in my class. I know that might not be accessible for all different needs, but that's something they can all fairly easily do. And then
yeah.
they start to interact with each other and they'll be like, oh, like, can my dinosaur have some water out of your bowl type thing? And it's like, it's really cute to see the way they've made relationships. Cause I was truthfully like a little anxious about that. I was thinking it would be very much, okay, we do literacy and math on the computer, but we don't really get any of the other components of the kindergarten curriculum that are so important. That we're thinking like that's one of the 4 frames. Literacy
Mhm.
and math are together. Like if we're only doing 1/4 of our program, like yikes, that seems problematic. But we are able to do so many other things. Like we do a lot of STEM challenges. So tomorrow I have it written down. We're gonna do like the how to catch a snowman
Oh,
book, and then we're
cool.
gonna do like a little trap for your snowman and see what they come up with. And it's just like so cool to see how creative they are with basic household materials. And in terms of like it really also reminds me in future when I go back to the classroom, like I'm someone who's like, oh, I need all these things. I need to go to the dollar store. I need to have this. I need to have that. And it's like, oh, kids are doing cool things with their journal and a Kleenex box, and that's how they're like building out of something. But they're seeing like, oh, I can open my journal and I can balance a Kleenex box on top, and it's a triangle, and I'm seeing these things, and I'm like, oh, I'm out here trying to do all this work, and you can find cool things, and you're so impressed by it. And it's such rich learning, which such simple materials. And then kids are still learning from each other, even though sometimes it's harder to see. They're seeing like, okay, if I angle my computer like this, now you can see what I've set up, and taking inspiration from each other, which I've just been blown away by. And I'm really fortunate to have that. It's still part of the program because that's something I really like about kindergarten, that like social emotional piece that they are playing together.
No, that's great. So it sounds like you're still getting tons of inquiry play and exploration. You're having dramatic play. You are using life skills within your program. And then the students are just having their normal conversations and developing friendships. And through all of that comes in the French vocabulary as well, just through those normal interactions.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's, I would say, maybe just to like add on here, it's also really cool to see like that family members are getting some of the French, and some of like they're getting like it's highlighting play in a really cool way, which is something I found in the spring as well. So it wasn't necessarily a big surprise that parents were like, oh, my kid does this and now they know this about shapes, or now they know this like they know how to graph, and this makes sense about how what you're doing with play and how it translates. But it's cool in the French component, I would say, now that we're live all day, it's like, hey, my 2-year-old brother is speaking French over here because he's overhearing so much of it. And mom and dad now know, like, okay, like I have a child who was in my class last year, and her parents were all like, mom and dad would be like, I'm so confused. She's saying this and singing this, and we're trying to find it on YouTube, and we have no idea what she's saying in French. And they're like, now we know she's singing the song incorrectly. And this is what she's made up off of. But like, we can go back and find it and really relate to that.
Oh, that's so neat. It is definitely with this virtual learning. It's like parents are getting a crash course in play-based learning and how children learn through play and children learn through exploring materials and through connecting with their peers. And then they also get some French lessons with it too. So
Exactly.
nice. No, I think that's really great. So that was the next thing I was going to kind of touch on, is involving your non-French speaking parents in that French learning. But it sounds like, especially in that virtual classroom, just through the experiences that their children have, they're able to kind of, get into the words and the vocabulary that their child has a grasp of already. So that must be really great for the parents to feel like they have a little bit of a stronger grasp on the French language just through that daily exposure with their child. What a unique experience.
Exactly. No, it's so cool to see. And there's like sometimes parents see things and I'm like, okay, this is the word I'm reading. And they're like, that doesn't make sense at all. Like, and they look at the screen, I'm like, I know, I'm so sorry. We're teaching your child these letter sounds and you're trying to teach them to sound out the word because that's what you're doing in English. I'm like, it's not always gonna work. Like, we really need to look at pictures. And that's like, I'm honest with the kids. I'm like, okay, like it's okay to look at the pictures. Like, that's a really first step in reading. We look at the pictures. What does it say? Flip the page. Like, we don't always need to look at the words. It's something parents usually are really worried about, I'd say. Like, that's often September every year. It's like, oh no, I don't speak French. Like, how am I supposed to support my child? And it's like, math doesn't matter. Like, don't even touch that with math, because it's all they're gonna learn the French vocab, and a triangle has 3 sides, whether it's triangle or triangle. Like, that doesn't matter. And then in English, like, I'm like, no, support the English. Like, don't worry about getting French books from the library and trying to teach your kid French. Like, we can cover that at school. Like, that's our board expectation, is that parents aren't expected to do any French. I'm like, if you can read in your home language, for me in past, that's always been English, but it would be the same for anyone. It's like, okay, all the English or any other reading strategies are the same. We look at the pictures in English, we're going to look at the pictures in French. We look at surrounding words, context, blending words, saying them slowly, looking for little words inside them. Like, those strategies are all the same. So teaching them those strategies in English is so valuable, because then they can apply it in French, which usually kids are reading in French a little later than they read in English, just because they have to have the oral vocab. Like, they don't have the 4 years of background that kids who are in English speaking homes would have.
Oh, that's great. That's really interesting. So do you have any favorite games or activities, or even if it's just play centers What are your favorites in the French Immersion Play-Based Classroom? What are your favorite activities or games?
So I don't do a ton of like whole group games. There's like one is Jaya Kia, which is like a fun, like I would do every now and then, which is really similar to English, like I have, who has. So
Mhm.
I'm always really bad at the game, and then I have to like count it. I'm like, okay, we have 24 kids. We have to do this in a day that's everyone's here. Because if there's 24 cards and it loops in a circle, like it has to make sense. But it would be like, I have a present. Who has a dog? I have a dog, and they can just use the picture, which is
Mhm.
really awesome. That like it does say Jaya Kia, but often they're like they don't really realize that yet, which is totally fine. They just know that the thing they have is on top and the thing that they're looking for and someone else is at the bottom. So that
Mhm.
like picture association is really awesome, and that's something
Cool.
that I'm sure is the same in English. That we're like, okay, what is it? The picture of the dog? Like, let's run the word for dog, and then we can play this game. It's totally fine. I played, yeah, I do a lot more like small group activities.
Mhm.
And so for like early years, like it'd be a lot more like building things to be like, okay, let's here's a word or here's a letter and we're gonna build this just because I
Mhm.
want them to have like something tangible I find helpful. Or paint this or just like make it in some way to have the connection. And then online is I would just say like open-ended play with a lot of like, okay, bring whatever you want today, or like, or we'll have a targeted play, but often it's bring whatever you want. And nope, someone's using their Play-Doh and they're saying they're making food, and someone else over here has their dinosaurs, and someone over there is making an airplane out of Lego. And it's like, okay, they start like, how can we connect these things? How can we write a story? Okay, my dinosaur is going to do this, and then your airplane's going to take the dinosaur. And just seeing that even if they have different things, they can kind of loop it together in this
Mhm.
like story writing things, and then writing that a little bit into a story. And like, hey, we just did some writing here. Now we can read it, and now we're authors. Like, how cool is that? But making it the background of like, okay, this was our open-ended play, and I didn't choose any of this. Like, this was all on you. Or in terms of like activities
Mhm.
to do to guide the language.
I love that with virtual learning is that when the students bring their toys to whatever sort of play session that you have, you know that that's one of their favorites. Like that's what they're really interested in. So, of course, what an amazing opportunity for some really relevant vocabulary and language learning there with that experience.
No,
It's really
exactly. Yeah, that it's like it's what they care the most about, so they want the words for it. And I think I'm like this would be for anyone, but in the beginning, I was really worried about like we had kids who are like, I have my Barbie dream house and this and this and this, and have like a
cool.
hundreds of toys. And it's like, oh, these kids, some kids over here have like 5 toys, and that's just like depending on what they're like, what has been provided for them, and there's just different equity pieces. And with that, so like that was something I was really worried about in the beginning of like, okay, how do I make this fair? How do I make sure no kids are upset looking at all these things that other people have? But it
Mhm.
seems to be like kids are kids. Like they'll all bring a cardboard box to play with,
Oh,
and they're
yeah.
so happy with that. And it's like, okay.
I had someone bring a snowboard today. So, they'll find something that they like. It's as adults, sometimes I think we prescribe the way we view things to children, and that's just not the way they view it, right? If she
Exactly.
sees a full-sized adult snowboard as the best toy ever, then good for her. Like, that's fun. All right. So as we get ready to wrap up here, I'm just wondering if you could share a piece of advice for French immersion educators that are looking to adopt play-based learning in their classrooms. Maybe they're nervous, maybe they're apprehensive, maybe they haven't seen it done before, maybe it's not their experience. What kind of advice would you give to those educators?
Yes, I think for me, something that's been really important is finding out like mentors in it. And I would say I haven't necessarily always had French speaking mentors. That last year, my mentor was an English teacher, like an English kindergarten teacher, who just talked about what play based learning looked like in her classroom. I was like, oh, I can apply these things. They're going to look a little bit different. But it was really easy to see how it would translate more easily than I would say than a French speaking teacher who wasn't doing play based learning. She would talk about, for example, she did around January, I guess. It's when Elsa, like the Frozen movie came out, and her kids loved Frozen, our kids loved Frozen. So she showed me she did a little small world play setup where she had all the Frozen characters, blocks, and then like different, and then a sheet with different names of, okay, here are all the names of all the different building parts I have out with a picture so that if they want to write about it, they have the word cues. And I was like, oh, that's so easy. I'll just translate it into French. Like I can do that in 5 minutes, but it's the same idea. So it's like, oh, now my kids are building their castles. They love it. They're experimenting with different ways to build. They have the little characters. So I just like printed out Elsa and Anna from the internet and strapped them onto blocks. Like I didn't have to go out and buy a figurine or anything.
Cool.
But then they're doing small word play. They're doing like January, they had a little bit of French. So Elsa and Anna could speak French a little bit depending on who is playing. So they get the vocab, but then they also have like the words to write out at that stage that some students ready to be like, oh, like that says block and it's a ba sound. Okay, I now have the picture cue so I can write it down, and did like a little drawing of like, here's what it looked like. And it's like, okay, the activity was so similar to what they were doing in the English classroom. That was a really strong play-based classroom. Like just the translating piece is fairly easy. So in terms of seeking out a mentor, it doesn't even have to be a French speaking mentor. That I'm sure is really helpful in some ways to see exactly how it looks. But just talking to someone who really knows what they're doing and is passionate about it, I'm sure they would be happy to help to see how it could work in your classroom. And just like spending time seeing that will help. And then if possible, like they might also have connections. Like I think people who like play-based learning and are into it, it's something that's like they're seeking out constantly to be okay, like let me go on Pinterest or let me go on Instagram and see who's doing this well so that I can get ideas. So even if they don't have the French themselves, they might say, oh, I follow this person on Instagram and they're doing this, like let's check that out to see how we can make this helpful for you.
I love that. I love that advice to seek a mentor, because when you seek a mentor who is fully on board and has been doing play-based learning, they've been the guinea pig. So if everything was going to blow up and be terrible, you would have already known because they would have told you. So it is comfort in knowing that they have done that and that they have found enough success in it that they would want to pass it on to someone else.
Yeah, if they're comfortable taking on, like if there's someone who's leading into it, they're also probably someone who's creative and willing to problem solve a little bit as well, hopefully.
Sure. That's great. Okay, Katie, thank you so much for coming on today. That was really great. I find sometimes it's hard to find support and resources and information for French education. And I hope that this can help French immersion educators, even if they're not in kindergarten, maybe if they're in primary and they want to include play in how they run their programming. I think that your advice here today will be so helpful. Thank you so much, Katie.
Thanks, Jessica. And yeah, you make a great point. I think this can really extend past kindergarten, that yes, this oral vocab is so important to get through play in the early years, but as kids get older, like they want to experiment, they want to investigate and explore, and that's how they learn. So yeah, play-based learning for all grades at times that work for you as an educator and ways that they can support your kids' learning. Thank you so much for having me today. It's really cool to get to talk to you and to get to share a little bit of why I love play-based learning in the French immersion kindergarten classroom.
I love talking to like-minded people. All right, thank you very much. And thank you for tuning in today to the Paragon of Play podcast. For more early and primary education tips, research, and tutorials, subscribe and ring the notification bell. That way you're notified whenever a new video or podcast episode is uploaded. Can't wait till next Sunday? Find me on Instagram, Facebook, or on my blog. Information here on the screen.